Okay, wait. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Give
Sure.
it 30 seconds, I think, no?
Yes, let's start in time.
Because I'm looking at that time.
Okay, so it's time now. So good afternoon and good evening to you all joining from wherever you are. Thank you for joining us today for another interesting session of Expert Speak organized by the Asian Institute of Diplomacy and International Affairs. Today we have two distinguished speakers, Mr. Shakti Sinha ji and Mr. Nishant ji, to discuss on Nepal's political instability and foreign policy challenges before Prime Minister Deuba. Viewers may post their questions in the chat box, and those watching online can post in the comment section. As we all know, for past 1 year, Nepal has been witnessing political turmoil, beginning with the differences between former Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli and Pushp Kamal Dahal Prachanda on leading the government and power sharing in 2020. What was once hailed as mature political merger and cited as the largest Nepal Communist Party was again Maoist center and UML. Oli's hyper-nationalism, anti-India-centric, ultra-nationalistic outlook, Kalapani episode with India, dissolution of the lower house twice, and finally a historic verdict by the Supreme Court of Nepal restoring the house. And finally, appointment of Sher Bahadur Deuba as the new Prime Minister of Nepal. With 1.5 year term left, what lies before Deuba needs an expert discussion. Thus, we will be discussing all these developments with our esteemed experts. But before I begin, let's have a few words about our esteemed speakers. Mr. Shakti Sinha is the Honorary Director at Atal Bihari Vajpayee Institute of Policy Research and International Studies at MH University, Vadodara. He is a Distinguished Fellow at India Foundation, a non-resident fellow, Senior Fellow at Institute of South Asian Studies, Singapore, and a Senior Fellow at WRI, India. Mr. Sinha was also the former Director of Nehru Memorial Museum and Library and was part of the Indian Administrative Services from the 1979 batch. He has served as the Joint Secretary in the Prime Minister's Office in the past. He has extensive experience and achievement in governance, including hands-on field level implementation, provincial level leadership, monitoring and policy development, strategic policy development, assisting national leadership, mentoring and facilitating national development strategy, process generally, and governance policy development in conflict country, Afghanistan, and watching interests of development country and monitoring performance of international financial institution World Bank Group. He has worked for the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan from April 2006 to December 2008, and shortly with UNDP Afghanistan as a strategic policy advisor. About Mr. Nishant is the Executive President of the Nepal Democracy Foundation, NDF, a think tank and NGO working in the area of democracy, diplomacy, governance, and development. He is the Distinguished Fellow at AIDIA. He has more than 15 years of experience as an international development professional, democracy practitioner, political analyst, broadcaster, and university lecturer. Mr. Jay is a Draper Hill Fellow at Stanford University and has an impressive track record of serving at international organizations in leadership positions such as National Democratic Institute, NDI, and Millennium Challenge Cooperation, MCC. He is also a noted media personality and has produced several television programs and documentaries, besides hosting political and current affairs talk shows on Nepal's leading channel, Kantipur Television. Occasionally, Mr. Jay writes op-ed columns on current affairs, politics, international relations, and development issues. Time permitting, he also teaches international business and business environment analysis to MBA and EMBA students. With this, I request the experts to give their opening comments in a nutshell as what major challenges Deuba faces as he proceeds to the office. Sinha sir?
Okay, thank you very much, Rishi, for the very, very generous introduction. Thank you to AIDIA for organizing this. It's a pleasure to be here. And it's a pleasure to be interacting with a professional like Nishant, who's really well versed in politics as well as in general field of economic development. It's rare. So it's a very good to be here. Now, Nepal, you mentioned that 1 year has been a bit of instability. Actually, watching Nepal for the last quarter century, in fact, my first visit to Nepal was in January 1996, when the Prime Minister was Sher Bahadur Deuba. And Nepal has seen considerable amount of, if you look at the number of prime ministers in the last 25 years, very large number. It has periods of stability, but it has been a fair amount of churn going on. Some of it is understandable. The transition from a semi-democratic, then to monarchic, then to democracy, to the constitution making, to an armed insurrection. So we must accept that much amount of instability. People should not judge it too harshly. Going forward, I think Mr. Deuba has won his vote of confidence, but one section of his supporter, whose support he got, Mr. Maruk Van Nepal and his group, that is not legally available to him for day-to-day functioning. It is available only to elect the leader only under the Nepalese constitution. And to keep this group together, to keep the Samajwadi Janata Party together, it's not going to be easy because political parties are very amorphous. They are not very rigid in that sense. And since ideology is not really an issue anymore in the 21st century, not just in Nepal, but most parts of the world, there would be considerable amount of bargaining going on all the time. At the situation when economically the world is in serious trouble, in Nepal itself, because of COVID, inability to vaccinate people, things will remain difficult for some time to come. So I have great sympathy for anybody sitting in the job of the Prime Minister. Mr. Deuba, of course, is a very experienced person. It's the 5th time I think he's becoming Prime Minister. Yeah, 5th time. First was when I remember I saw him. So it's not going to be easy to do all this balancing all the time. Within his own party, of course, there are also other voices coming up who want to change of generation, etc. So it is going to be very, very difficult skating on ice. We as friends of Nepal wish Nepal all the best. I think it's in all our interests to see a stable Nepal, stable not just politically, but able then to restart the growth process, particularly at a time when its two neighbors, North and South, do not have the best of relations. It is going to be skating on ice for Mr. Deuba looking ahead for the next 1 year, 1.5 years. I'll stop here, and in the conversation, I'm sure we'll discuss more.
It's going to be difficult. With this, Mr. Jay, your opening remarks.
Thank you, Rishi, and thank you, Ira, and thank you, Shakti Shab, to be with us today. I'm really privileged to be in such great companies, and Shakti Shab has been a good friend of mine as well as a good friend of Nepal for a very long time. And I have been privileged to listening to him in the past on several occasions. So one more time, it's a privileged moment for me. I would just like to add a few more words to what Shakti Sahab have just said. If there is one word that I think describes Nepal based both domestically and internationally, then I think that should be the word unstable or instability. If you go by the numbers, I just read it a couple of days back. Somebody said that Nepal has had about 48 prime ministers in the last 50 years. But I'm more than sure that at least there are 20 prime ministers in as many years. So if we take that as a parameter of Nepal's political instability, then I think Nepal is doing fairly well, very, very unstable. Having said that, the advent of new Prime Minister, Mr. Sher Bahadur Deuba, who is on his 5th stint, and he believes that if his horoscope supports, he will be Nepal's Prime Minister, I think 2 more times, because he's destined to be Nepal's Prime Minister 7 times at least. That's what his astrologers have suggested him. So we can have a couple of more stints from Deuba maybe in the future. But one thing is there, I think that goes and that plays very well to Mr. Deuba's favor. And that is the expectation level from him is very, very low. So since people don't have great expectations from him, whatever he would do, if he can just keep the performance level to, let's say, a minimum standard, he can still walk out from his office as a successful one. And he also has to do quite a bit of reputation cleaning. He became prime minister for 4 years in the past, but none of his tenure can be remembered for anything extraordinary or anything remarkable that Nepal experienced during his tenure, or because of him. Rather, he can be associated with uh, doing some damages to democracy, uh, making the parliamentarians go for horse trading and many other democratic vices. So he has an opportunity this time to clean up his image. And since the expectation level is very low, I think he has a good chance that he will come out to be a winner. And the other thing that is going to his favor is the kind of support he harnessed just a couple of days back in the parliament. He got 165 uh, members on his side, though his party doesn't have even half of that. So that shows that he has a kind of support that he would need to sail comfortably, at least by the arithmetics of parliament for next 1.5 year time. And as Sakti Saab was trying to say, he has got the support of UML, he has got the support of, let's say, the Maoist party, he has got the support of both the factions of Jata Samajwadi party. So almost you can say that this is an all-party government. So that I think goes in his favor. But the challenges are equally humongous. Though I'll be talking more about that and in detail, maybe I think in the coming minutes. But there is one big challenge that he has to overcome, and that is to to bring democracy on track. He has become a prime minister by that special decision of the Supreme Court. That is one thing. But in that process of him becoming the prime minister, he made two parties split. Both now, UML and Janta Samajwad Party are at the verge of being split. So that is not something that he would like to be remembered in future, that he was the cause for the two major parties of Nepal being split. Though they haven't officially split until now, but they are, I think, almost there. So whether he will be able to bring back democracy on track or not, I think that's going to be the biggest challenge he will be facing. But as of now, in Parliament, he's comfortably placed, and looks like there won't be any challenge to his number for next 1.5 year.
Thank you. Very strongly worded challenges and advice. I'm coming to a threading question, which is to you, Mr. Sinha, is about how do you see democracy in Nepal? Evolving with Supreme Courts coming to the rescue of political parties, and it is seen as an astounding victory of the democracy. And seeing what has happened in the past, as Mr. Jay also discussed, do we really see that democracy and we can really celebrate this judicial verdict as a victory of democracy?
That's a very, very challenging question itself. It's not just a challenge for Nepal, because actually the democratic process should deliver it through itself and not an outside agency like the Supreme Court. You're right in that sense. But the point is that in a democratic system, not just in new ones like Nepal, which is barely a few decades old, but even something like the United States, which is 200 years plus, 250 years plus democracy, critical moments, you do need the courts to step in. As we saw in the case of the Trump election, we saw in the case of the George Bush election in the year 2000. So, this is not unusual. However, there's a danger of too much ceding space to judiciary inside the democracy process itself, which is not a healthy development. I would particularly draw attention to the Supreme Court judgment on the demerger of the parties. That to me was a very unusual. I'll be very diplomatic. I mean, yes, restoring parliament was the right thing to do. The decision to dissolve parliament to me was definitely not within the confines of the constitution. But the demerger of the parties itself, I would think, is something which courts have to be very careful about, because rather than strengthening democracy, they could, in that sense, weaken democracy. See, democracy, whether we like it or not, at the end of the day, is about getting power and your vision through majority of support. That's fair. That does not mean the majority does not count. It just means that to get your vision of the country accepted, to come to power, you need democratic means, which is the numbers. And if numbers are So even if a split takes place unethically, let me put it that way, once the numbers are re-established in parliament, then I think that numbers have to be accepted. Otherwise, there is no end to it. There's absolutely no end to it. So I think the need for Nepalese political parties, and Jay has just mentioned, the two major parties are virtually split. They're not legally split for reasons that they themselves know, well, it's difficult for them to be legally split, but virtually they are split. Ultimately, you do require a certain consolidation of around political parties, because otherwise the will of the people have to be reflected through some mechanisms. Political parties are mechanisms to reflect the will of the people only. Otherwise, you can't have 10 million people standing for elections in a country of 30 million. So you need this kind of consolidation, representative democracy. And I think going forward, that is what. But again, as I said, I will not be too harsh in judging Nepal. If you look at its recent history, I think one should give Nepal its due. And despite all that, the parliamentary system is functioning. People, if there's something wrong, go to courts to set it right. I think that instead of picking up the gun, I think that is very, very commendable, and that must be appreciated.
Mr. Jay?
Yeah, talking strictly from the perspective of safeguarding democracy, there are quite a few challenges before all of us, as Satish was also trying to indicate. One of them is that at this stage, Nepal is ideologically very disaligned. And I think to bring a kind of healthy electoral competition, ideologically, if the parties are aligned, then I think that would have better results. What I'm trying to say is this: Nepali Congress is by and large a democratic party. Then we have two communist parties, UML and the Maoists. At this stage, it's the Maoists who has become the biggest supporter of a democratic party called Nepali Congress. Where is the ideology over there? The chief of the Maoist party, Prachanda, is the same guy for whom Mr. Deuba had put a price tag on his head of 50 lakhs. So at one time, they were arch enemies, but now they are aligned and they have formed the government together. So where this will lead this country in future? I think the natural course, as it would happen one day, sooner or later, would be, let's say, if it is a healthy democracy, that there would be a kind of uh, political, ideological alliance. So until that happens, the kind of situation that we can create in a parliament would be very unnatural. That means Nepal is going to see, let's say, a couple of more elections and maybe a couple of more decades before this ideological alignment takes place. I think there is one looming danger on democracy from this ideological perspective. The other one is for next 1.5 year time. I hope it doesn't happen, but there is still a possibility of horse trading. It's already taking place in a very, very bad manner. Uh, the parliamentarians are changing their party or their sides, uh, like we do that when we play cards. That okay, for 1 hour you are my partner, and for another hour, okay, there is a different partner. Even I think more frequently than that. Just in about 1 month, at least a dozen of parliamentarians have changed their side. I think this is again not a healthy sign for democracy. Number two. Number three, uh, the previous Prime Minister, Mr. Oli, had brought so many severe challenges to democracy when he made those ordinances uh, for his own personal or factional interests. Though those ordinances have been revoked, but the decisions made under those ordinances, like the appointments of the constitutional bodies, will be over there. And as the constitutional bodies are very important, very critical in democracy, if they don't have the rightfully chosen members, then the kind of result they can extract in a democracy, I think, is not going to be proper. So that is going to be another challenge for democracy. Also, uh, I have seen civil society and people in general also divided. Some have gone to an extent of supporting the kind of unhealthy changes that were introduced by Mr. Oli. So even public needs to be brought to a level where some kind of propriety in terms of democracy should be restored in their psyche. So there are several fronts on which I think democracy is going to be challenged in future. But as they say, democracy has its own correcting measures. It can correct itself in due course. But the tragedy is that it takes time. So one day, I'm more than sure that democracy will be brought back on track, but that will have a price tag, and the price tag can be in the form of a lot of valuable time being wasted, and in the process, Nepal's development prospects being compromised. So yes, I see very serious challenges for democracy in Nepal in coming days.
Just to add a sentence, Rishi, just to add a sentence or two to what was said. Beginning there, where actually explained the political parties, a lack of ideology. You have the UML, which is a communist party. It is actually socially extremely conservative. I mean, can you have something more glaring than that? So as long as you have this very glaring contradictions, it is very difficult for political parties in that sense in Nepal to function as a coherent and not as an individual driven. So therefore the horse trading that they mentioned at the end, that is liable to happen. So the party is merely a gathering of people. It does not, has nothing to really common keep them together except power. So that's why you have horse trading on such a large scale.
But sir, would you say that ideologies really matter in the case of Nepal? We have, like, we see majority of political parties having a left orientation, like Maoist or MLA and others. They are aligning to certain kind of ideology, but on the front of unity, because see, when 2017 unity happened, it was seen as a ideological unity as well as a merger of maturity. But somehow I think the ideology is missing in that
Yeah.
kind of. Would you what? Yeah.
That's exactly that, Rishi. Absolutely. This is what I'm trying to say, that when ideology is completely missing, see that coming together was 2017, you knew what was driving it. So it was not that they agreed on the vision of Nepal together. I'm not even sure whether there's a vision of Nepal together. And I don't see the UMN as at all as a left of center party. I do not see it at all. A party which is, say, wedded to language, Sanskrit I'm very fond of, but is wedded to Sanskrit in that sense, does represent a kind of social conservatism. It may have been revolutionary in the context of monarchical rule 30, 40 years ago. In the Nepal politics of today and the churn which happened thanks to the massive violence which has, not thanks to it, but due to the massive violence which happened for a long time, to the Maoists, this thing, and many of the suppressed communities did come up. Are they being reflected in the political structures? Is left parties who took up their cause are willing to shift them up? Or, like in every revolution, ultimately the older conservative forces slowly reassert themselves and put them back in power. And that leads to the contradiction of the political process, which does not allow it to consolidate as a democracy, but is always open to give and take, is always open to co-opting one section of it to break the broader alliance. Which political parties, not in Nepal alone, most countries are quite good at co-opting one section at a time to break a larger unity. So whether it is the Janjatis, whether it's the Madhesis, they're always able to do that politics. And therefore, instability, I think, will continue as long as this kind of process is ongoing.
And I think if ideologies were to matter, Chinese would not have doubted Maoists, in the initial phase, but they did. So now coming to you, Mr. Jay, would you like to give some comments on it? Or should I?
Yes, I think you raised a very valid question, whether there is any ideology left in Nepalese politics or not. And the answer would be very simple. There is no ideology in Nepalese politics as of now on this day. But again, that is my issue, and that I think adds a challenge to democracy. Without ideology, how a democracy can function? How the politics or the political parties or the political leaders are making their politics in Nepal these days. Almost every party, and to that effect, almost every noted leader has the same modus operandi. There is, let's say, one top bracketed leader, then he has, let's say, several leaders around him, like in a solar system, maybe four, five, six. They make the second layer of political parties. Then you can find, let's say, a third layer that would go around as the satellites of those second layer leaders. Then there you'd find a group of people who you can say are the patrons or the promoters or the financiers. They have they come mostly from the business communities. They also have, in the meantime, brought some media houses, if not then at least some journalists in that system. So it's a kind of full-fledged, you can say, solar system over there, or it behaves like a solar system. And one top leader being, let's say, um, the sun over there around which all these leaders and the tertiary level leaders and the other support groups move around. So there are many solar systems like this in the form of many top leaders, and that makes Nepal's political universe. And almost every political party functions the same way. So it's media, it's the business community, it's the brokers, and it's the political leaders. They have made a system that invariably in every party with every political leader looks the same. So there is hardly any debate on ideological issues or on developmental issues when the political party meets internally. So you're right. There is almost non-existence of ideology in Nepal's politics at this stage. But democracy can't remain without ideology for too long. So there would be a day when there would be, let's say, the real ideologies being brought back in politics, and at the time there would be also this question of alignment. As of now, everybody is, let's say, moving in every direction one wants. So yes, just about a week back, I was talking to a friend of mine. They would say that he was saying that when you look at Nepal's politics, and if you compare it to a football match, then you can see that there are the players who wear different jerseys, but you'll forget from which side they are playing, which goal post they're aiming at. Sometimes they make a goal in their own goal post. At times, you can find even the referee making a goal, and even that goal being counted. Okay, so it's a total mess at this stage. So Nepal has to come out from this kind of situation rather sooner than later. And if we are too late, I think the politics have a very dear price to pay.
Okay. Now moving on to the other question, it's on domestic front. We have broadly discussed what challenges like before Deuba, but Prime Minister Deuba faces an immediate challenge, which is handling COVID-19 crisis, as well as improving economy, because considering the present situation, it is in shambles. So he has 1.5 uninterrupted year to work on it. We understand that his past or previous administrations have not been, counted on so well grounds. So how do we see what were the initial indications, considering he has 165 votes? So what are the initial indications that he might, consider some good in that on the domestic front?
Right now, we only have to wish for it, in the sense that I'm not following it on a minute-to-minute basis, and I'm not able to give the lovely football analogy and the astronomical analogy that Jay could give. But I have not seen any such thing. Yes, it is accepted that COVID is a big challenge, though the number of deaths may be limited. Thank God for that. The people vaccinated is really very low. The fact is that vaccines are not available globally. Let us be very clear on that. So whichever government is going to have very difficulty. But in the changing scenario, that vaccine production is now being ramped up, Nepal should immediately move to try and buy in advance vaccines that are yet to be manufactured, because those vaccines are already under pressure of being sold. So you will not have the availability even after the ramped up production. And therefore, the need to be proactive on that is very, very essential. Now, because of the restrictions placed because of COVID and because of the global situation, our economies are in a bad shape. There is no doubt about that. How much maneuver does the government have to really generate? I'm very clear in my mind, and this thing that one, currency reform is a very important thing. Nepal has put it off for many, many years, decades, actually 5-6 decades now. You have to make other conditions favorable for investment, which will create jobs, which will increase Nepal's exports. Nepal's exports to GDP ratio has to go up. These ratios do not go up in 6 months or 1 year. Let us be very clear. These require structural changes. Nepal has shown social indicators have improved tremendously of Nepal. that is more a people's movement by itself. It's not so much prompted by structural policies, but economics does not work that way. In economics, government through monetary, fiscal, and procedural methods have to relook at what is it you want to make Nepal, how can it utilize its position best. So Nepal has an outstanding position in one way. It can access north and the south. What do you do so that you are able to improve your imports and exports so that your imports could be used to add value in the economy, add jobs to the economy, and make GDP go up? These are very, very serious issues. I have not seen any such indication. I hope I'm completely wrong, which will suggest that there's any deep thinking either in trying to tackle the COVID thing or in trying to regenerate and really fire the engines of economic growth. But I'm very happy to be proved wrong. I'll be extremely happy to be proved wrong, in fact.
Mr. Jain?
Yeah, the situation is not very prospective. Having said that, we can see some light at the end of the tunnel. For example, several countries have pledged to provide Nepal vaccinations, and some of them are already pouring in. China has placed, I think, close to 2 million more. There is Johnson and Johnson that has arrived from the US as assistance just a couple of days back. They've started doing vaccination from yesterday. Uh, Nepal already has placed an order of about, I think, 4 million vaccinations from China, and that we hope to be delivered soon. Also, we had placed an order of about 1 million to Serum. We already had made a payment in advance, but unfortunately, that yet has to come. India is struggling with its own domestic challenge in vaccinating its own people, so that hasn't come. So yes, the challenge is over there, but there are some signs that maybe slowly, may not be right in time, but we're going to get vaccinated. But again, as and when it happens, we have to wait and watch for that one. But one thing that I think is good for Nepal is that our banks have been kept in pretty stable condition. The liquidity factor, I think, is there, which earlier used to be in crisis during these kind of challenging days. But this time, banks have kept a good liquidity. Our foreign currency reserve is also doing good. Okay, so since there is enough liquidity and foreign currency reserve is in good size, uh, I don't see very harsh economic days as we look into the future. But yes, there are thousands of people who have lost their jobs. Several industries, particularly, let's say, the tourism industry, they have seen massive suffering. Most of the hotels have remained closed since last about 1.5 year time. Travel companies, the airlines are going through very difficult days. So yes, we can be hopeful, but the present day looks pretty challenging. But slowly the things look like it's coming to normalcy. If we are not hit by the third wave, maybe the suffering will be less than what we expect that to happen in future. So all fingers crossed that the third wave either doesn't hit, or as and when it hits, we are all vaccinated.
Now coming to the question of India and Nepal, I think most interesting and everybody is looking forward to. There is general view in India that New Delhi has every reason to celebrate Deuba's arrival. Because relations during KPOL went really downhill, and now Prime Minister Modi, in an unusual, what was not existing in past 1 year, other than KPOL wishing Prime Minister Modi on Independence Day. Prime Minister Modi had a telephonic conversation with Deuba and he tweeted the congratulatory message. So something that was missing. Do you think things will change now? A broad question is still with a lot of hope. Mr. Sinha.
I'm one of those who do not go by these things very easily, in the sense that yes, there is also enough written in the last 6 months that the government of India and Mr. Oli had actually started developing a fairly good working relationship in the last 6-8 months. There's no doubt about it. Of course, people in Nepal who believe in conspiracy theories went on the other extreme. I will not go to that extent of this thing. India, I think, by and large, has come to the conclusion, after having burnt its fingers many times in Nepal, that we will work with whoever is in power in Nepal. It's not our job to select winners and losers. It's not our job to be identified with anybody. That doesn't work because, even though Nepal is not a small country, 30 million people, when you see the size of India next to it, you will feel a sort of sense of very big neighbor, So that has to be disabused. And I think we have now slowly started developing this new equations with the Nepalese leadership. We are happy for Mr. Deuba. We'll be happy with whoever is the prime minister. A prime minister who has legitimacy in Nepal is able to carry the government and is able to implement policies. That prime minister is in India's interest. But if India starts choosing prime ministers, then that prime minister actually becomes a liability in the Nepalese scene. So India has to be very careful. The congratulations, in fact, people criticize Prime Minister Modi for waiting for Mr. Deuba to win his confidence vote before he congratulated him. I think it was only right. Since Mr. Deuba had been appointed through the Supreme Court order, it was best that Mr. Deuba established his confidence. And then the two of them spoke like two counterparts, two neighbors, two friends. We agree on many things, we may not agree on anything. So in that sense, the public positions taken in Nepal, say on Kalapani, do you think any prime minister will be able to roll that back? No. They can ignore it. It can slowly start dying as a political issue, but it will remain where it is. Nobody is going to go to the constitution and amend it again to remove that. Let's be very clear on that. So there are certain constraints which we have to accept and work with. I would hope for good working relationship between India and Nepal. It's the interest of both of us that we are honest with each other and try to accommodate as much as possible. But at the end of the day, every prime minister of India or Nepal works in his country's interest. That is something which is central to any relationship between two countries.
I think we often, when we discuss India's Nepal policy, we look for some tangible aspects, what we can count. And as you rightly mentioned, that at present, we will work with whoever comes to power. And that's a kind of approach that we have opted in South Asia.
Yeah.
Mr. Jay, your comments, please.
Jay, you're muted.
Something I think on a pleasant note that can be expected from Deuba's government so far Nepal-India relationship is concerned, I think would be predictability. Mr. Oli was very adventurous, at the same time very unpredictable. At one point, he looked very friendly, but at the other point, he could do something else that could startle anyone. But with Deuba's presence, I think, at the helm of the affairs in Nepal, uh, predictability, I think, will be of higher order. Uh, and I hope he doesn't go the adventurous path as Mr. Oli decided to go. But at the same time, Mr. Oli has left quite a few challenges for Mr. Deuba to tackle. As Shakti Saab was trying to say, the issue of Nepal's new map that also has these territories of Kalapani, Limpodhura, and Lipulek. Though Nepal has every reason to feel and believe that that belongs to Nepal, but the way it was brought in Nepal's map by a constitutional amendment, I think that has left India guessing. And that may be, I think, a deal breaker because uh, there is very little chance that the two parties can talk it out, but without talking, there is not going to be a solution either. So it's almost like a catch-22 situation: what to do and what not to do. And I think that is the primary reason why there hasn't been any formal conversation or dialogue taken place on that particular issue. The other issue I think that is left for Mr. Deuba to tackle would be the issue of EPG, Eminent Persons Group. In my personal opinion, that is now a dead horse. There is no need to flog it. It's not going to move any further. The very composition of EPG was itself flawed. That should not have been in that way in the first hand, more so from Nepal's side, because all the people that were put there in EPG were the people from the hills. They had never lived in the flat areas, whereas India shares its border with Nepal mostly in the flat areas thereof. So to me, that was very flawed. and it's better in everybody's interest that EPG uh, is withdrawn, and that is given its due farewell. Having said that, I think the other looming issues that are always over there, these are the perennial issues like trade deficit. Nepal will have to do a lot of catching up if it wants to mend any gap in that trade gap. Also, the trade and transit. Though there are some new ports under consideration that Nepal may try to use in future, there are certain infrastructure coming up as well on Nepal's east and western sides, whereby we can get access to some of the ports of Gujarat rather at a shorter distance. So there are quite a few prospective developments that are taking place, and hopefully they will deliver in time the good results that Nepal is expecting. But as of now, I can see so far Nepal-India relationship is concerned. First and foremost challenge that Deuba would have to face is to bring normalcy. As of now, the relationship is there. Both the parties claim very friendly, but there is a very high degree of doubt in both the countries. So I think it would be in everybody's interest if Deuba can bring that normalcy factor in Nepal-India relationship, and we should be looking forward to that.
Uh, Coming forward to my other question, which is to Director to Sinha. The anti-India movement has become so much ingrained in Nepalese politics that social media is often filled with or trending with, go back India, back of India, and it has become a normal trend. We agree or disagree, but it is a reality. Since anti-Indianism converts into political mandate, do you think Nepali Congress will be any different? Mind it, Nepali Congress had supported only in moving resolution, as we discussed, on producing a new map which showed the disputed territories with India.
As I said, when you do it, local politics has its own logic. No political party in Nepal could have opposed that. If a prime minister is saying my land has been stolen by big India, I want it back, which political party would commit political suicide by saying that this is wrong? Even to suggest that we can discuss with India at that moment would not have been acceptable. So, when you create this hyper movement, then it becomes difficult to back out of it, which is why I mentioned it, that will remain a permanent problem. Fortunately, countries can damp it down by not raising it again and again, which they are doing. In fact, that's what Nepal and India have done for the last 1 year or so. So the fact remains that when you are a 1.3 billion people and your neighbor is 30 million, you will have asymmetries staring at you in the face, and it becomes easy. I'm not just talking about Nepal. It becomes easy for the local elite then to generate hyper nationalism to justify their own corruption, their own inefficiency, their own nepotism, and the fact that they have not delivered. That is true all over the world. I mean, go to Canada. US is extremely unpopular, but the Canadian economy is completely joined to the US economy. It can't work without the US economy, right? So this big brother thing will always, syndrome will remain. We have to learn to live with it. What we should do is not aggravate it by taking on public posturing. We have to be, not just with Nepal, but others also, less seen as giving advice, less being preachy about it, being more sensitive. A lot of it is psychological, because ultimately countries, as I say, work in their own interest. So this will remain there. What do you do to undermine it through other measures? Jay has mentioned very rightly, there are trade issues. Now, trade issues are partly factual, partly mythical. Now, yes, Nepal has a tremendous trade deficit with India. So it looks very serious. But India absorbs 70% of Nepal's exports. Even if India absorbs 100% of Nepal's exports, the trade deficit will still be very large. So the trick is not to worry about the deficit, but to stress on Nepal becoming economically competitive to increase its overall exports, which is why the point raised by Jay of access to Nepal to the world through Indian ports, those kind of things, already things are changing. Now the monopoly of Concor on transporting containers is gone now. Anybody can do it through the market forces. We in India have to ensure that using market forces, not governments, you are able to help the Nepalese economy become more competitive. So Nepal will produce more, export more, sell more, And once you're into a much deeper economic relationship at a much higher level, then psychologically things are different. But when you're seen as dependent, what is the component of trade deficit which India is really big? It's the imports of petroleum and its products, which Nepal needs. It's not that it's any benefit to anybody in that sense, But you can't tell people that, trade deficit is very big. Please create economic opportunities to generate more involvement, more jobs. So there are these things. I would not worry. I mean, in the sense that I would not make my sleep over anti-India feeling. I must work that as one of the factors that will remain, which I have to factor in. But there are other positive factors which I must develop further. So there are various ways to handle it.
We understand that on economic front, it's a reality and factual reality, but emotionally, people in Nepal see it as a looming burden. But the other aspect of it is when we see that issues like the exchange of notes, the demonetization happened, and the issue is still is a pending issue. I would like to understand why that issue has yet not been resolved, despite Nepal has been, and mind it, as you mentioned about US, Canada, and the kind of existence they have. Similar kind of existence we have, because we have an open border economy which is dependent on each other. In that sense, how this demonetization, it is not coming up again because we have other fresh issues that have come up. But how will it play, in larger scale, on a larger scale when we discuss India-Nepal economic relations, Mr. Sinha?
As I said, you raised a very good point of demonetization and the notes with the Nepal Rashtra Bank. These are real issues which we had just solved the 1,000 rupee problem earlier, found with the Nepal Rashtra Bank and PM's directions. And then with the demonetization, recreated the problem. As I said, you have to work to reduce a lot of informal barriers to this kind of economic activity. We have free trade agreement in Nepal. Our currencies are fully convertible. And yet you go to Gorakhpur or across Nepal side, you will see tremendous amount of illegal trade going on. Why would you do illegal trade when there's no import duty, right? Why? Because there are structural issues to trade, banks, lines of credits, certifications, standardizations, lots and lots of daily issues are there, which as the bigger country, I'm not using the word bigger brother, I'm just using the word a factual point, bigger country, you have to take that extra step. Because at the end of the day, size matters, but it's also psychological, as I said. I was chatting with a Pakistani a few years ago, and they complained about, we are a small country. And I said, sir, but the 5th largest country in the world in population terms, Pakistan. You're not a small country, right? Nepal can complain, small country, 30 million, which of course means that about 120 countries in the world are smaller than Nepal, actually, But so it's psychological, but that's a reality. If you don't like my face, that's a reality. Whether my face is good or not good is not important. Those are the kind of extra effort that you have to make, respecting in a spirit of, what should I say? Generosity is a bad word. In a spirit of empathy, I should understand your position and then move from there and not expect you to understand my position all the time. If both sides one by one adopt that stand of empathy, and as I said, as a country of 1.3 billion, it's much more important for us to first take that stand of empathy and try to work, and Nepal is a big country. It has many problems, many challenges, many potentials, many things you can learn from Nepal. The way Nepal has improved its social indicators, absolutely amazing in a very short period. What can we? So, if you have this spirit, I think we can. I'm more hopeful.
Mr. Jay?
Yeah, you started your previous question on the issue of anti-Indian sentiment. Let me add a few words on that. Uh, Nepal and India will always have a kind of asymmetrical relationship. Why? Because India is about 40 times bigger than Nepal in size and 48 times bigger in population. So if you have these two countries as neighbors, 40 times bigger or 48 times bigger, either in terms of area or population, than the other one, the issue of asymmetry will always be over there. That's why whenever I have to say, I think that Nepal and India can have issues or challenges from three perspectives. Number one, the natural challenges. There are about 2,500 or close to that number rivers flowing from Nepal to India. And every river, if it enters from one country to another, brings its own sets of challenges or issues. So there can be 2,500 or more challenges, but surprisingly and pleasantly, most of those challenges have been, I think, met pretty smartly. Though there are still a couple of issues that need attention. The other challenges, I think, between Nepal and India are the procedural challenges that can be, let's say, of the trade, transit, customs, import, export, and many other things. Again, these things need, I think, very smart mutual deliberation on which we can come to a consensus and we can take decisions. I think even there are not too many challenges on this frontier. But I think the biggest challenge that Nepal and India is having, at least from Nepal side, is the manufactured issues. And when I say the manufactured issues, these are the issues normally political in nature. And as I said earlier, Nepal has, let's say, a set of democratic political parties and then a set of communist political parties. These communist parties, wherever they are in the world, they thrive on the issues of, let's say, expansionism or imperialism and whatnot. So the communists in Nepal have very easily termed India as expansionist and America as imperialist. And that's how their cadres are raised. So there is this constant, very high dose of fodder that is given to each and every young cadre of Communist Party that India is an expansionist country. That's how they raise their party's slogans, manifestos, and programs and whatnot. So a degree of this anti-Indian sentiment would always be over there in Nepal. And I would like to say that would be a manufactured issue. That is not what every Nepalese is born with, that I have to hate India. Okay, these are manufactured, they acquire it later. So I think as Shakti Sahab was saying, that there has to be an empathy for this kind of issue. So long Nepal has these communist parties, this kind of issue will be over there, and a degree of anti-Indian sentiments, at least in some limited cross sections, will always be over there. Having said that, I think on the other frontiers, Nepal and India have tremendous potential to collaborate, to partner, and that are still not untapped. For an example, uh, the Indians in 2018 spent close to 5.6 trillion rupees for their traveling, both domestically and externally or internationally. Nepal, being the nearest country, having several flights from India and so many borders open, mostly it's an open border. Nepal can benefit immensely from Indian travelers or tourists. That issue, or that I think agenda has not been addressed properly from Nepal's side. India has something called Bollywood, though many may not like this expression, but there is this very mammoth film industry in India that churns out a net worth of close to 183 billion dollars every year. Look at that. Nepal can be a very attractive shooting destinations. That particular portion still goes untapped. I had heard that when this film Jindagi Milegi Na Dobara was released, the tourism in Spain was hiked up by 32%. So I think Nepal and India need to find new avenues to partner. There need to be, I think, some more creative and young minds with fresh perspectives working on these very untapped issues. So I think if there are responsible leaders on the two sides, if they mean business, if the young minds, the fresh minds, the creative minds are put at work, Nepal and India can benefit from each other. More so, Nepal can benefit from India in a tremendous way. You have BCCI, one of the richest sports institutions in the whole world. You always look for neutral venues. You go to Dubai to play your IPL matches. Nepal can be a very good host for those kind of matches. So I think these are the new avenues that need to be
Good
looked
point.
from different perspectives. Let's not only go for those very stereotypical age-old propositions. Okay, uh, let's have fresh perspectives, young minds working on these creative ideas.
Just to add, Rishi, Mr. Bose has raised a point that despite the fact that in Oli's government time things were bad, well, on the stereotypical issues that Jay mentioned, like irrigation and dams, well, major agreements have been signed and they're moving ahead. Just the other day, this very major SAB project, Saptaj company in India, has signed this massive thing, billions of dollars. So it's you have to move parallelly on all these issues. And Indian films are shot in New Zealand, right? Lots of money. Fiji, Spain, now Latin America, South Africa for a long time. So, there are different opportunities for these countries to take advantage of and not be tied down by the past all the time.
Yeah, what I was trying to say, Rishi, was that we are kept hostage to those decade-old
Yeah.
problems. Okay, of course, I think these are the problems, or these are the issues, or these are the challenges that need to be addressed. But just by keeping those issues forever and not being able to think creatively, I think is not doing any good to any two of the countries.
Very wise advice. Now coming to the last portion of the discussion, I think we have already exceeded the time. But without a China question, I think the discussion will remain incomplete. And so the question of China, we know that Oli was considered as a blue-eye guy for China, and last minute, movements from embassy to Oli's office and Prachanda meeting and all. So that thing happened. Now, Deuba in office, no ideological compulsions between Deuba and China. There are prospects. Considerably, it will be seen as okay. Deuba can change the course. Let people decide. Let politicians decide what they wish. But the general perception is Deuba may change that outcome. Now coming to, there is a very important element in Nepalese politics is when they the coalition politics is an element of compulsion. The political compulsion in the Nepalese politics, we see that sometimes the other party does not wish to have an agreement with China, but the other party wishes. For example, BRI happened because Prachanda wanted, and Nepali Congress was silent on that because there was a compulsion of coalition. So in that manner, do we see that a similar kind of thing might happen? Chinese are very good at strategizing things. For example, they strategize this Sagarmatha military cooperation. In that manner, will China try to take advantage or try to enter into Nepal through this means that there is a coalition government? We have Prachanda, who really likes us, because we recently saw during the World Leader Conference with President Xi to celebrate the centenary CPC, to celebrate 100 years of CPC. Prachanda was almost blindfoldedly praising President Xi and China on incorrect in factual grounds, on factual grounds. So in that manner, how China is going to play in Nepal in the present circumstances?
You can't discuss Nepal without China. That's a good one. The way the Chinese ambassador last year tried to prevent the breakup of the party, United Communist Party, the way they lobbied openly for Prime Minister Oli to continue, the fact that Xi Jinping rang up President Bhandari to speak to her, very, very unusual. I can't imagine India could have done worse things, but not in this manner ever in the past.
There was a workshop to train the Nepalese leaders by the CPC.
Yes, but I think China subsequently may not have been very happy with what it did, because I think in the last 6 months, though yes, Mr. Oli has been very unpredictable and shall remain unpredictable, so you never know whose friend is he, except his own. He did seem to move away from China also at the same time. Hence the outreach by Prachanda to China. Because Prachanda was being pursued by China not to break with Oli. So, this is a changing world. China does represent a very massive source of investment of funds. Not that funds are an issue, because as the history of the Millennium Challenge grant in Nepal is concerned, Nepal was happy to reject a grant. So these are politics involved all the time. I cannot see a Nepalese prime minister take an anti-China stance. Let me be very clear. When President Pranab Mukherjee went to Kathmandu, it was declared as a holiday. But the government then, under pressure from opposition, had to say, as and when Xi Jinping will come to Kathmandu, we shall also declare that as a holiday. I was there because I was in Kathmandu that day when all this was happening, So yes, Mr. Deuba may not be in China's bag, so to say, as previous prime ministers, but the Chinese element economically and politically shall remain very much present, because Nepal's rulers first started trying to use the China card in the mid-50s, even before Nepal and China had diplomatic relations, as a way to counterbalance the overwhelmingly Indian influence at that moment of time. So I think in the real world, the real politics, this is something which we'll have to live with. How do you maneuver? How do you see that the two countries, India and Nepal, work together without bringing in the China factor directly? So you cannot ask Nepal to choose. That would be completely unfair to ask Nepal to choose. So create circumstances and machinations that work in Nepal's interest. So Nepal feels, yes, its interests are being looked after. To me, that is the best way to counter the China card. Let me put it that way.
Mr.
Yeah, ideally and traditionally, no prime minister ever, or to that effect, no government ever in Nepal has expressively said whether one is anti-India or anti-China. Uh, until a few years back, China had, I think, a very restricted policy towards Nepal. It wasn't interested to an extent that it is interested now in looking at the political parties and the individual leaders and the factions so minutely and trying to make an intervention. It's a very recent phenomenon. Until now, and that has been endorsed by our previous leaders who have visited China, uh, starting from the Mao's time, that China had always accepted that China can be a good friend of Nepal, but not but the relationship between Nepal and India will always remain special. That's why China may have poured billions of dollars in African countries and in some in other countries, but their assistance to Nepal was always lesser in amount than what India has been doing that to Nepal. So China always had this very checked, restricted and balanced attitude towards Nepal. But I think after the advent of these communist parties and their sudden and shocking success, as at one point they got even two-thirds in the parliament, and they got about 60% of Nepal's votes. I think China got its ambition higher in Nepal as well. And perhaps other ideas just started creeping in that maybe Nepal can be something like China in future. So China started showing excessive interest in Nepal, and the result is what we see these days, that there is an official written agreement between Communist Party of Nepal and China's CPC, and they extend not only pleasantries, but also they come and they train the Nepalese leaders belonging to that party over here. Never ever we would imagine that the Chinese president would give a direct call to our president, but that is now happening on a more frequent level. Uh, After a very, very long time, a sitting Chinese president came to Nepal just a couple of years back. So all these new developments are showing that China is now more interested in Nepal. One of the reasons could be that China now has a kind of different strategy to deal with India. So China wants Nepal on its side. That's why I think China is taking excessive interest in Nepal. And let's see how this relationship unfolds in future. But Nepal should be, and it has been playing, I think, until now, uh, if we can leave that tenure of Oli's of 3.5 years, uh, a very balanced game. If we don't go back in the history when Mahendra was here, otherwise, uh, Nepal always had entertained both India and China, I think, with enough respect and kind gestures. But Oli was different, and I would not like to say that Oli was pro-China or pro-India or anti-Indian, anti-India or anti-China. Oli was pro-Oli. Whatever he did it for himself to save his government, to save his faction within his party. So I think Oli era should be dealt with an exception. That should not be a marker or a parameter to Nepal's relationship with either India or China. So if we don't look at it from that perspective, I think Nepal would remain a very good friend to both India and China in a foreseeable future, but we'll always have this special relationship with India and a very friendly relationship with China.
Taking the privilege of a moderator, I think when we discuss Nepal-China relations, we tend to forget that China has a very critical border with Nepal, very long and a very critical border with Nepal, where Tibet plays a very prominent role. In the past, whatever agreements there are, for example, the Sagarmatha military exercise or their will to have a agreement that is called I think legal agreement, something legal mutual assistance agreement they signed, but they were expecting a extradition treaty. So on those terms, we tend to forget that Tibet is playing a card, but somehow I feel that in the Indian media, that element is not taken into consideration. It is just when China meets India in Nepal, it is just about that. So I think we need to look and we need to emphasize more on the Tibet factor as well. Now, coming to the question side, I think we have quite a lot of good suggestions and question. And there is one question from Sachin Pandey. What would be the relation between India and Nepal after many challenges like the border issue, because previous relations were more tough?
Well, relations will continue. As we have been discussing for the last hour, there are many challenges, no doubt, but new challenges will come up. The fact that geographically you are next to each other, rather close, despite your best effort, our best, your best effort, the border is an open border. And I'm not into that roti-beti relationship. Leave it that aside for a moment. The fact remains that culturally and religiously, there is so much that we share, I mean, I tell people Pashupatinath is as much mine as Kamakhya is yours. When I went to Guwahati, Kamakhya, I met a number of friends from Kathmandu there, So this is something which is there in our relationship, which is very much to be central to it, but which need not be emphasized and overemphasized, which is why I don't like this Beti Roti argument, because that tends to take away from the fact that this is a forward-looking relationship, right? We have to think of the future. How do we work together to increase the areas of cooperation and agreement? What is it that can be done and should be done, particularly by India, to economically empower Nepal, so that the political issues can be tackled in a much more healthier, more friendlier spirit, So, Pandaji, that will remain the issue for the future. As we sort out one challenge, a new challenge will always come up. Let's remember that, And I think that is something that in the real world we live with.
Mr. Jay, would you like to comment?
Yeah, though it's true that there is this roti-beti relationship between Nepal and India, but it almost has become now a kind of cliche. So let's define it in a different way. Somebody said that Nepal and India has this a civilizational relationship, and I think that explains the relationship in a better perspective. You pick up any scripture, be that Ramayana or Mahabharata, invariably the territories both of Nepal and India are mentioned over there. Uh, in Mahabharata, the Pandavas came to Virat or Viratnagar for that hiding. And there are many other mentions of Nepal in Mahabharata. Similarly, in Ramayana, Ram came to Janakpur, my hometown, and got married to Sita. And since that era, you can see that this relationship is almost not only dependent but inseparable. You, even if you want, you can't separate it. So anybody who is there in position and has enough senses should not try to do that, because that will go against people's will, and any decision that is imposed against the people's will can't sustain for long. Though some might try to do that, like there is this recent talk going on in Nepal that Nepal India border should be regulated. Well, regulations can have different interpretations, and the regulation can go to different extents. But if anybody has a dream that this border should be closed, then I think that is a daydream, because the kind of relationship the people of Nepal and India living on the two sides of the border are having since centuries, if it is closed, that's going to bring something very unnatural in the relationship, and that would be very difficult to sustain. That's why I said that EPG is a dead horse. That had some provisions like this, that the border should be very strictly regulated. I think that's not going to happen. That should not be happen, because the people of these two countries, not only for their living, but for their relationship, need to cross their border on everyday basis. You can't separate them like
Exactly.
that. So I think anybody who is dealing with some important and critical issues between Nepal and India need to look at the relationship from the people's perspective who live on the two sides of the border. If you travel to some of these crossing points, Rishi, you will find those bordering pillars over there. You won't be able to say whether that is whether which side is Nepal and which side is India. They are living in such an intertwined way over there. You can't just separate them by a barbed wire. So I think Nepal and India needs a lot of nurturing for its relationship, a lot of care and farsightedness. Any radical decisions are taken, and Nepal doesn't have a reason to be angry with India. India shouldn't be having any reason to be angry with Nepal, provided level-headeds can meet and can talk the issues out and make, let's say, proper decisions, putting the people's priority on top. So I think there is every reason for me to be hopeful that Nepal and India would have a very nice relationship ever in future.
You know, it's not just for living, but also the fact is your people who are living in one country and their agricultural land in the other country. See, Treaty of Sogoli drew a line. You can't, that line doesn't change the reality that the same people across each other, married to each other, खेत उधर है, काम यहाँ कर रहा है. So, these are realities that people, unfortunately, like the EPG, did not understand. That is a good point.
Yeah. And there are many examples that would endorse these facts. Udit Narayan was born in Nepal. He became a big Bollywood celebrity. Manisha Koirala was born in Nepal. She became a big Bollywood celebrity. Okay. You can find several politicians of Nepalese lineages who have become your chief ministers, like I think one in that Mr. Dhami, Uttarakhand.
Uttarakhand.
Yeah, he has his family tree that gets back into Nepalese territory. So I think these things should be understood in perspectives. One should not try to look an issue in these things. Rather, these things should be looked at as our linking cords. And if that happens, then I think Nepal and India has every reason to enjoy the relationship.
Last year I was sitting in PMO office in Nepal, and I was having a discussion with the Foreign Policy Advisor of Prime Minister Oli. And one point he made on regulating the border is that Oli was intending to treat the land travel between India and Nepal at par with the air travel. So my basic question was, if you wish to do so, who is going to arrange those passports and other kind of requirements and documentation to those who really don't understand the concept of border, these political borders? So I think that sums up that the kind of relationship we have, it's very difficult to define in those political terms. And on the other hand, I think we see in chat box, there are some questions. And I think most of the questions have been answered. There is a question by Kesav Dwivedi who says, how do you see relationship among parties who supported Deuba in the coming days? And I think that has been answered. And there are some other observations. So thank you, gentlemen. And last 30 seconds to each of you to conclude.
Let Jay start. Let Jay start. This time, let Jay start it.
Okay, first and foremost, thank you, Rishi, for conducting a meaningful conversation like this. I hope our listeners are benefiting, or they have been benefited. Uh, since I am an eternal optimist individual, I think Nepal and India can only uh, learn and earn from each other. Maybe earning can be more on Nepal's side, but learning can be on both sides. These two countries have enough to offer to each other. Uh, and I think there is no reason that there should be any animosity unless we go for that manufactured reasons, as I explained earlier. And Nepal's internal politics will always have some ramifications on its relationship with India, because talking about India or not talking about India always has some reflection on the vote bank. And until and unless there is democracy, until and unless there will be elections taking place, there will be a mention, either in a good way or in a bad way, of India, because that will have its reflections on some votes. So some issues will always remain over there, but I don't see any issue flaring up and going out of hand and creating very uncomfortable situation between the two countries. So I will remain very hopeful for a very prosperous and healthy relationship between the two countries.
Mr. Sinha?
I second that completely. I think both of us are maturing in understanding each other a little better. The political elite, people have no issue. Let me be very clear. It's the political elite who have to come to this understanding, accepting geography, culture, economics, and accepting a common future together. Common future does not mean exclusive future. Common future just means that there's so many areas where you can economically work together in the interest of everybody. And I think if we don't exploit this, then we are in trouble. I think that, as I've seen, that even despite the up and down relationship, things are moving in many directions. There are setbacks. Earlier, you didn't need a passport at Kathmandu airport. Now you do, right? Or the citizenship issue that a girl gets married in that. There would be some issues coming up in Nepal. We'll have to learn to live with that, not get hyper about it. But at the same time, where each country will work in its own interest, I think working together on many issues will be really helpful to both of them. I definitely hope that our leadership on all sides will exercise their wisdom and not get carried away by the mood of the moment. Because the moods of the moment can change, are very fickle. Leadership has to be certitude. We need a certain amount of certitude and not fickleness in our relationship. But thank you very much, Rishi, for conducting it. Thank you, AIDIA, for organizing it. And everybody who's listening in, thank you very much.
Okay, so just before we conclude, before we end, we have Sajina, who would be giving the formal vote of thanks, who actually managed everything at the last moment. After yesterday, she managed everything, and now she's there with the vote of thanks. Sajina, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It was a pleasure to hear from such a prominent experts, Shakti sir and Jay sir, on current political developments in Nepal and challenges it faces ahead. So as Shakti sir said in his initial remarks, that this is not a new thing for Nepal. So, and as PM Deuba is experienced as it makes his fifth term as Prime Minister of Nepal, and Joy sir said that it is a golden chance for him to sign as in Nepal, because like as he said, Nepal people has very less expectation from him. Yeah, like I also feel the same because as a Nepali citizen. So I think it's a very good chance for him to sign. So yeah, it was a wonderful session, and I hope we can engage in this kind of interaction in the future as well. And sincere thanks to Shakti sir and Jay sir for agreeing to join this session on such a short notice. And thanks to a lot, Rishi ji, and for your hard work. And also thanks a lot to all the participants for taking time to listen this talk. And yeah, thank you. I won't take a long time because we have already
Thank you very
exceeded our
much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sajina. Thank you, Rishi.
I hope to see you all soon. Once again.
Yes, yes, Rishi. We shall see you. Lovely. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Shakti sir.
Suman, how are you?
Good, sir.
Good. Very good.
Glad to see you.
Good to see you.